Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to a new episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Why does Israel exist? What is its purpose? And why do Jews live in this land? There are many answers. Some refer to the Torah, the Old Testament, others to the Holocaust. Some see God, and others see global anti-Semitism. But what creates peoplehood in Israel today, at a time when the entire raison d'etre of the country is undermined by the attacks on October 7th and the war that followed, is an important question that needs to be investigated. Because how can we unite as a people? And what can we unite around? And what narrative do we tell ourselves? That's what we're going to try to analyze on today's episode. I'm joined by Naama Klar, who's done a lot of research and work on exactly this question. What is Israeli peoplehood? Naama is director of the Koret International School for Jewish Peoplehood at ANU, the Museum for the Jewish People, what was once known as Beit HaTfutzot. In her previous role, Naama was deputy CEO of the Re'ut Group, an Israeli think and do tank that diagnoses and tackles strategic threats ignored by national leadership. I speak to Naama about the different ways a sense of peoplehood can be created for Israelis, and what it can also do to help bridge the divide between the State of Israel and diaspora Jewry. Have a listen. Naama Klar, it's great to have you on the JPPI podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So we're talking, you recently came to JPPI, and you gave a very interesting lecture about the topic of peoplehood. But really, when I often talk about peoplehood here on this podcast, the direction that we're looking at things is more, or at least as I have been doing until now, is looking at it on the Israel-diaspora relationship. So really, mostly looking at what can Israel do to help strengthen that relationship, or what do diaspora Jews need from Israel to create a stronger identity, a stronger sense of identity, of peoplehood, of connection to the State of Israel. We recently did an episode here as well with Shlomit Mali from the AMI organization talking about, okay, but what do Israelis need to know about the diaspora so that can maybe impact their understanding of what it means to be part of a larger Jewish people and a larger Jewish world. But what was interesting in your lecture and in the topic that you're focused on is kind of looking at what is our story as an Israeli people today? What drives us? What unites us? What is our collective story? And it's something that I often feel is missing. And one of the things that you point out, interestingly, is how it's evolved over time, right? It evolved and you'll get into this, of course, but if we were the sanctuary once upon a time, because all Jews were being persecuted and we had to save ourselves and we were going to get killed if we didn't come together and establish the Jewish state of Israel, well, that's obviously changed a bit. So I'd love to hear from you, Naama, kind of what is this issue that you're looking at and why is it so important?
Okay, huge question.
Yes.
I'm going to try and break it down just a little bit, just to make sure we're all on the same page, because there's one problem at the professional field of peoplehood, is that we're using the same words, but we have different content to the words, which makes it really difficult to conduct a conversation. And maybe I'll go back to that later on, just explaining more about contemporary challenges in getting out of October 7th together. So let's start with what does peoplehood stands for? Because it sounds like a made-up word in Hebrew. In Hebrew, you say Amiyut Yehudit. It sounds weird. It sounds made up. So what does it stand for? Amiyut means that us, the collective, the Jewish collective, are a people. And this world has lots and lots of other people. The Armenian, the Greek, the Irish people. The Jews are a people as well. And it comes as a counter to common mistakes about Judaism, about being a Jew. A very widespread mistake in the diaspora is that Judaism is a religion. Obviously, it's not a religion, since you can be an atheist, a non-religious person, and you're still Jewish, right, even according to the Jewish Codex of Law, the Halakha. And then another common mistake, mostly in Israel, is that Judaism is a nationality, meaning expressing sovereignty over the land of Israel. Well, it's true, but that's not what being Jewish means. We're a people, and then we have the nation state, and we live here, and we serve in the IDF because we're a part of this bigger Jewish people. And the problem is that when you hold a narrow expressions of Judaism as your main and only identity, that is the basis for the Jewish people to get separated into different groups, different sects that might not ever come together again. So we're reminding everyone the shared common basis, the foundation, we're a people. And as the Jewish people, the big mishpucha, we have our religion, our languages, our homeland, our nation state, our culture, our memory, our heritage. Everything is a result of us being a people. And if I can give a metaphor that I think is useful, there's the story of this blind man and the elephant. So you're holding a tail. You're sure the elephant is like a rope. And you've been holding this tail for over 2,000 years. So you're kind of convinced. But the elephant is still an elephant and not a rope. Mm-hmm. So this is some kind of a metaphor to peoplehood, and it's very, very useful because we're working against those common mistakes. We believe those mistakes, these narrow expressions of Judaism as your only connection to being a Jew, is dangerous for our future, and that's why we're aiming for the shared basis, the shared foundation, which is peoplehood.
Now, this is important, though. I think what's important to understand is why do I care? I mean, I'm a person. I live my life. Yeah, I live in a country. I have to serve in the army, and I have to pay taxes, and I have to do, my duties and my privileges or rights, like every country around the world. Why is this at all something that an Israeli Jew or an American Jew or a European Jew, why should I care about this issue?
Such a great question. So I think I'm going to answer my personal answer first, if that's okay. So I grew up Israeli. I'm Israeli asli. Like I'm Israeli end to end, because some of us here were born to olim or made aliyah, so they have an advantage over me. I grew up in the most narrow mindset regarding the most Israeli mindset regarding what does it mean to be a Jew. And then I worked for a small think tank called the Reut Institute, and I came there doing socioeconomic development, which is what I've learned in university. And then I was offered a promotion, but I was offered to take the Jewish Peoplehood task force, which is, of course, meaningless and not that important, right? Because I was Israeli back then. And here's why I took a project. I'm not really understanding what this Peoplehood stands for or why does it matter, but I did had one motivation to take it. Back then, I was reading for the first time the book series called Dune by Frank Herbert. And I'm a sci-fi fan. And then on the third book comes the Jews of Dune. And you wouldn't believe it, they look like Jews from maybe Bnei Brak today. Mm-hmm. Or Williamsburg today. So there's no Earth. Everyone lives in space, traveling through time, having all those forms of livelihood you can imagine. And then there's the Jews who look exactly the same as today. And it got me thinking about us as Jews. Are we going to survive through history as Jews if we diversify too much out of what we used to be? So that was really a weird motivation to take upon this task force. But eventually, what I understood is that assuming the lens of Jewish peoplehood is the only way to save Zionism. It's the only way to put the Zionist train back on tracks, because it's already off tracks. And what does Zionism stands for? Because for some reason, Zionism isn't about creating the cherry tomato or the Iron Dome. If you would have tried to learn about Israel from watching its 75th Yom HaAtzmaut celebrations, you would have been amazed to find that we actually came here for the start of nation. Right. So no, that's the wrong answer. We've built the state for it to serve as the national homeland of the Jewish people. The Jewish people is a real people. It's not an ideal. It's not a concept. It's a people. You have families, communities. You can get data on them like you at the JPPI do so beautifully, and you can get to know them.
But
And
what's
this
wrong?
is
Wait, but Naama, what's wrong with the story being Startup Nation, right? Why can't that be what connects us? We invent cool things. We're smart people. We're creative. We're innovative. So we're the Startup Nation. Why is that not enough? Why does that mean Zionism's off tracks?
Zionism is off tracks when the state of Israel is failing to be a meaningful force for the Jewish people. So being a startup nation is nice to have. It's instrumental. It's not the goal, and it's not enough. So for example, if this state is, instead of strengthening Jewish leadership worldwide, is weakening them, and I can refer to an event from 2017 called the Blacklist of Rabbis, for an example. This is a story about the Israeli Rabbanut creating a list of a couple of hundred rabbis from all around the world, and their conversions aren't good enough for the Israeli bureaucrats, so they're being blacklisted and their converts aren't getting any services here in Israel. Most of those rabbis were Orthodox, by the way, including Rabbi Lockstein, including Rabbi Adam Shire from Shar HaShamayim Synagogue in Montreal, which I think is the biggest Orthodox synagogue in the world, and Rabbi Fess, who established Nefesh B'Nefesh. All those people were blacklisted by the Jewish state. So this event had damaged the ability of Israel to be a positive force for the Jewish people, which puts that Zionism off track, because we built this state for the Jewish people, never only for the Israelis, who were a part of the people. We declared the state when we have 16% of the Jewish people in Israel. It didn't matter. The aspiration was being a positive force in Jewish history for the people.
But is it not the natural evolution, right, of what a country or a nation will go through, right? We were persecuted for so long, thousands of years. Establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 on the heels of the greatest genocide and the greatest disaster of the Jewish people, 6 million Jews murdered. And then we have the State of Israel. So naturally, in what's going to initially happen, and then of course we're attacked from every direction, and we fight wars in 48 and 56 and 67 and 73. But I would say from the 80s, and yes, the challenges are still there, and we definitely know since October 7th, we're not yet out of the woods, but we are probably in the strongest place that we've ever been. The Jewish people today are the strongest they have ever been, right? So is it not natural that we will shift, we'll move away from the Jewishness of the conversation to something more global, more universal?
Forever in history, the Jewish people moved between the edges of integration and being isolation. And it was used instrumentally because even in, let's take Eastern Europe, for example, you had some arenas of isolation. For example, the halakha, the Jewish Codex of Law, was the law for the Jewish townships. And then the areas of integration. Economy, for example, you always had to be integrated to a certain amount in order to thrive and survive. The thing is now that the new kid in town is the nation state. We only had it for 76 years or so, and we have to stay Jewish or connected to the Jewish people while having a nation state. That's the new factor. Will we succeed in securing our Jewish belonging, our identity as part of the Jewish people in the 5th generation for this country? I don't think it's a clear yes. I don't think it's, like you say in Hebrew, bakis shelanu, a given. I actually think it's hard work to secure the Israelis' Jewish future.
I'll tell you something. I think, first of all, I totally agree with you, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I do feel that we do need a story for why we're here, right? If you want people to stay here, and you just mentioned, for example, how we were talking about, terrorism and people and the attacks and the safety and security of the State of Israel. Well, if you want to look proportionally or per capita, if you're a Jew, where is it most dangerous? That where are you most likely to be killed for being a Jew? Yes, there's anti-Semitism all over the world, but the place that you're most likely to be killed for being a Jew is here in the state of Israel, right? So you might have a swastika sprawled on your synagogue or day school or JCC in, Chicago, LA, or Rio de Janeiro, but your chances of getting killed are a little less there than they are going to be walking down the streets of Jerusalem or Jaffa. So how do we get our kids and our grandkids to want to stay here, right? Because if they want to have a life that's quiet and safe and secure and prosper, this might not be the place for that to happen. So I totally agree. And then my question will be then, Naama, okay, how do we create that narrative? How do we create that sense of peoplehood?
That's so beautifully put, Yaakov. But there is another end to this equation, because Israel is the most dangerous place for Jews. As you said, statistically, since the establishment of the state, you're much more likely to be attacked as a Jew here in Israel. But since the establishment of the state of Israel, the Jewish people as a whole has been more secure than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
That's also true. So having this homeland makes us all safer. Without this place, we're so much more exposed. But being here is being very close to anti-Semitism, being exposed to the local Middle Eastern type of anti-Semitism that we have to live with every day. So we're here not because it's a safe place. We're here because it's our homeland. It's our bait. Israel is our home. If you're here because it's safe, maybe you will leave. Maybe you would be one out of 84,000 people who left since October 7th. And it's not the full number, it's just the first year. If you're here because it's your home, it's where you fulfill your Jewish life, your Zionist dream, you'll stay.
Mm-hmm.
Gadi Moses, for example, came back from captivity and was asked, "What now?" And he said, "Now we're rebuilding Nir Oz."
Right.
That's a proper Jewish Zionist answer to why we're here and what are we doing here.
How does it express itself, Naama, that we don't have that sense of peoplehood? How is it that illustrated in a daily life here in this country? Because I'll just maybe strengthen the question for a moment. We saw, for example, after maybe this is part of the answer. We saw after October 7th the great enlistment and people racing down south and civil society coming together. But I say maybe it's part of the answer because, when we have the external threat, that brings us together. But it's when we don't have the external threat that maybe we get a little lost.
Right. So what's the problem in us not really buying into the notion of Jewish peoplehood as Israelis? I'm going to be analytic here for a minute, okay? Okay. So the Israeli society as a whole has warm emotions toward world Jewry. And this has been examined by JPPI and other institutions on a regular basis. Basically, there's a kind notion. Nevertheless, the fundamental outlook of Israelis on world Jewry is colored by a piece of classic Zionism called negation of diaspora. In Hebrew, shlilat hagola. What does it mean? In classic Zionist thought leaders, a bunch of them, even though I think Brenner was the one to really use the phrase shlilat hagola, there was a notion saying the following: the Gola, diaspora, is a temporary, unwanted situation which is about to end, and all the Jews will be coming to Israel. Obviously, they said it in a time when maybe 8% of the Jews were here and the vast majority was outside of Israel. But this perception had become a piece of the classic Zionist narrative, Zionist mindset, and is still determining how Israelis look at world Jewry. So they do have this warm notion because they do feel this mishpucha feelings. But because of negation of diaspora, we see generally three types of responses to issues of world Jewry amongst Israelis. The first one is indifference, adishut. It's non-relevant, It's not that important. It's very low on the priorities. It's just something not that important. So indifference. The secondly, ignorance. They don't know anything. When we hear groups coming here, we ask them, um, where does the majority of the Jewish people live? The answer is, of course, outside of Israel, and they're all surprised. They think Israel is the biggest amount of Jews in the world, which is incorrect. We're very big. We're 44%. We're less than half. Majority of the Jews lives outside of Israel. So ignorance, they don't know anyone or anything about world Jewry. And then the last thing is condescendence. They look at world Jewry as second-class Jews, which have to prove their value. So they can either support Israel or make aliyah or make a donation. So either the three A's. So other than that, they're just not as important as Jews in Israel. So they look down at them. And where you can see this this common mindset in the Israeli media, because whenever world Jewry get coverage, it's about them proving the Zionist narrative. They're either suffering from BDS, from anti-Semitism, assimilating because they're weak, because they're disappearing, or they could be making aliyah, making a contribution, either financial or political, to the state of Israel. And in every other case, they're just not interesting. So if they're not answering to that brief, they're not on the agenda at all. We're blindsided.
Right. I mean, also we do like, on the other hand, to some extent, if we have some Jewish movie star or a Seinfeld or whatever, who does something big, or a Jew who somewhere in the world wins a Nobel Prize, we'll of course take credit. Of course it's belongs to us. We're good at doing that as well. I'm curious how this has all shifted in the aftermath of October 7th, right? Because we're now about 16 months later. One of the things that I felt after October 7th was that there's a huge opportunity, and I know that you see this as well. In obviously here in Israel, we find ourselves under attack, under physical attack, and still fighting and still trying to keep ourselves secure and safe and eradicate and eliminate the different enemies that are trying to eliminate us. But when you look around the world, you see that Jewish communities are also suffering, whether it's Australia or the US or Canada. Shots being fired at synagogues, explosive devices outside community centers, and just graffiti and slurs at Jews no matter where they are. And you had mentioned how Jews have to apply 1.4 times more for jobs in the job market. There is an understanding, you might have thought that in that trajectory, and you had these kind of two arrows that were going in different directions, Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews, you would have thought that they wouldn't necessarily converge. We're doing our thing, they're doing their thing. We might be Jewish, but we're not always connecting. What happens in Israel doesn't really impact some Jew in South Dakota. But come October 7th, and you see that the Jew in South Dakota, what happens here is going to impact them. So this interconnectivity now is a moment that I say, okay, what are we going to do with it, right? And I don't know that there's yet a good answer that I've heard. But I'm curious how this question about peoplehood and creating that identity, how has this shifted in the wake of the war that we find ourselves still in?
Okay. Oh, that's so beautifully put. It goes like this from my endpoint. The Jewish people is one people, but in almost every term, in every arena of life, we're keeping it separate, we're keeping it local and distinct for different communities. So instead of focusing on creating the shared, which is global, we're kind of focused on securing the separateness of the Jewish people in the way our organizations work, our philanthropy work, etc. Because if you wanted for people to get to October 7th, understanding they're a part of a global people, you need to teach a child in Akko and a child in Minnesota the same educational messages.
Right.
You should have your activists leader be able to converse with each other, and not only through the mediation processes. But it's not the case yet. I referred earlier on to the issue of shared language. I have global peers doing the same thing for their communities. And our professional language even used similarly. For example, the word Jewish continuity. My American peers use it to speak about marrying a Jew.
Right.
In Israelis, in Hebrew, here, we use it to speak about intergenerationally transmitted messages from one generation to the other in organizations, in families, in communities. It's not about marrying anyone. Another example is Ahavat Israel. Here we use it to say love for the Jewish collective, generally. In American Hebrew, they use it as like Ahavta lereacha kamocha, love a Jewish individual.
Right.
It's just not the same lingo. So how can we move together? We don't even have a shared language.
A shared Jewish language, right?
Exactly. Even for the professionals.
Right.
So October 7th is very unique, as you said, because it puts all the Jews in the world on the same timeline, because we're usually separate. But now we're all a part of this global Jewish crisis, which we called October 7th, the lifetime, not the date. And the last time we had been on a shared timeline, I think, is the end of the Iron Curtain.
The fight for the Soviet Jews.
Exactly, because the fight was shared. It was joint, and then the success was a moment for the entire Jewish people, and then we've received the Olim and the newcomers, the Russian Jews who came to North America, which enriched us and brought more good to our communities. So it was a shared Jewish moment, and since then, the early 90s, we had never had a shared Jewish moment. And now October 7th is exactly that. And what is amazing about this moment is the world had become more global, and Jews are a global brand, like Nike or Coca-Cola. Everyone understands that, except sometimes for us. And now everything we're experiencing is actually shared. So we're all fearful. We have fear. What does Jews do when they have fear? It's unbelievable. They do kitot konenut. How would I say that in English? Like
rapid
group?
Response teams or something.
Yeah, voluntary rapid response team. Not in Israel, worldwide. They seek a second passport. Not just in Israel. We have data about North America. Right. You can't really know it's Jews, but they're all asking the second passport to Germany.
Right.
You still have a lot of Jews that can get those passports. And they double down their investment on those relationships that can support them in difficult times. Where? In Israel and worldwide. It's unbelievable. We're experiencing the same moment. Let's take another example. The surge in demand for Jewish belonging. It's a real thing. So, those people in New York that buy more challah in the grocery stores, they have something shared with Agam Berger that found Jewish practices during captivity as something that gave her strength. So the surge in demand for Jewish belonging in our hearts is shared. It's global. Also, by the way, it's historical. In the 30s, in Nazi Germany, the registration rates for shuls were doubled. So it's harder to be a Jew, so you're becoming more Jewish. It's interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're sharing this moment globally. And what does it mean for us? I think one of the reasons we can't really already set the shared global goal for us as the Jewish people and getting ourselves out of this crisis is the scarcity in the notion of peoplehood. The understanding that it happens to us as the Jewish people, and not just as American Jewish communities, Israelis, South African communities, as a global people, is a necessary step for us to be able to move forward together. And until we get there, we're kind of stuck. So we might have a victory with Hezbollah. We might, Bezrat Hashem, bring back all of our hostages.
Yeah.
But the crisis is not going to end. right? Because Jewish vulnerability is already surfaced, and we have to manage that, not only the outcomes.
Very interesting and deeply thoughtful and thought-provoking. I want, in the last couple moments that we have left, Naama, I do, you are the head of the school, the Koret School at the ANU Museum of the Jewish People. Whenever I go to ANU, the one thing I'm very happy about, and anyone who hasn't been there should definitely go. A few years ago, and underwent a real major transformation. The first time I visited there was when I came with my family. Then we were still living in Chicago. I was a little kid back in the 1980s. First visit to Israel over a Passover, Pesach holiday. We went to, then it was, the Diaspora Museum in Beit HaTfutzot, as it was called, back at the Tel Aviv University campus. And I loved those little miniature synagogues. Like that's something that got stuck in your head. And I was so happy that in the transformation they kept those the little shoals from all over the world, because they're so unique and really special. But so much more that's there. Jewish heroes, and a special exhibit now on October 7th in the aftermath. Really, just so much that's there. But tell us for a moment what it is what is the Koret International School that you had? What is its purpose, and what is it trying to teach when it comes to this idea of Jewish peoplehood?
Okay. So ANU is about the Jewish story, and it's such a phenomenal story. I think also most of it is in the consensus, but a lot of people doesn't know the story. So ANU is just this huge and beautiful platform to learn and explore the story. And the little shuls that you've mentioned is the heart of ANU still. Another beautiful and new heart we have is the Codex Sassoon. It's the fullest, oldest Bible in the world. Such a huge asset that made Aliyah just one day before October 7th. And well, it was probably created in the Tiberias, but Toshav Chozer came back to Israel after 1100 years. And it's here. It's going to be up in the galleries whenever we're allowed to bring art back up to the gallery floors. And my department, the educational work, was actually established by Abba Kovner, an educator and a Nazi hunter, 40 years back. And we work under the approach of Jewish Peoplehood for about 30 years. So it's some sort of a legacy organization in this sense. What is special about ANU is the numbers. We're the biggest peoplehood institution in Israel. This is why I came to work here. My department works with 150,000 educational beneficiaries every year.
Wow.
This is incomparable in Israeli terms. We have about 300,000 visitors, and about half of them are educational every year. We work closely with the Ministry of Education, teachers and students, and with the IDF to a massive extent. We're some sort of Jewish identity provider for the IDF.
I'll tell you just on that, my daughter is an officer in Nativ, course Nativ, which is the conversion course. They're there all the time.
It's their second home.
Yeah.
And naturally. And we are always trying to do more and better. So bigger numbers, but better programming as well. So we've been doing that for such a long time. For example, our flag program called My Family Story. This is the 30th year of the program. We had over 80,000 students participated in it. This is humongous, and it's going to be such a huge celebration in June. Maybe I'll share a bit what we've done differently after October 7th, if that's interesting. So once October 7th broke, like everyone, we had a lot of us went to reserve, went to serve in the army immediately, and we were at our homes for a couple of weeks because we had constant missiles flying over our heads. And then quite soon we realized that October 7th happened to the Jewish story, because we have enjoyed a really nice season in this series, which probably was the best 80 years in Jewish history, probably. But now something new is starting, and it's here to stay. It's not going to end so soon. So we have to adapt the Jewish story. So we sat down and we've embraced a narrative of oscillating narrative. So we have good times, we have bad times, and we keep going. And then first and foremost, we've changed the museum narrative, which is, it's a big deal for museums to do that. And we kind of immediately done it and created the October 7th exhibition, etc. And educationally, we sat down to write, what can the Jewish story give us in those difficult times? And we had kind of good answers. And the biggest answer is a product called the Jewish Resilience Project, which is a one-day experience retelling yourself in this Jewish moment. And it's kind of a good experience for senior audiences. For example, today we had a Midrasha Leumit, which is the governmental entity for training of senior
Civil service workers. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think over 10,000 people had already participated in this experience. Yeah, it's really good. Another answer, for example, is that the role of Olim, of people who move to Israel now in society, is more important than ever, because we're going to work on Jewish cohesiveness. So we're starting a new program. It's actually next Wednesday in Anu, celebrating the importance of Olim in the Israeli society. It's called Ole Ole. It's in partnership with the Tel Aviv municipality and Nefesh B'Nefesh. All those activities are an outcome of us adapting to the new chapter in the Jewish story. And the increase in demand for Jewish belonging is really vivid in our day-to-day work here.
And it's something that's more and more needed, I think, definitely, as people search for that safety and security within their Jewish skin and within their Jewish identity, but also that sense of belonging, knowing that they're not alone in all of this. So Naama Klar from Anu, the head director of the Koret International School, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bsorot tovot.
Amen. Thanks for joining us on today's episode. You can find us, as always, where podcasts can be found on Apple and Spotify, YouTube, and of course, the website of Times of Israel. We'll be back on Thursday with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast. Take care.